When should you allocate your carbs throughout the course of the day? Should you have them with breakfast? Should you have them with lunch? Should you have them with dinner? Should you have them evenly across the board? Well, I'm going to answer that question because a lot of people asked me in a recent video that I posted up when I time my carbs and how I put carbs in my specific protocols if I'm not following a ketogenic diet at that point in time or if I'm not intermittent fasting. Hey, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. New videos every single Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. And make sure you hit that little bell so you can turn on notifications so you can be a part of whatever live broadcast I put up on the channel. And make sure you check out highleat.com down in the description to get special discounts on the latest and greatest apparel that I'm always wearing. So timing carbs is a tricky thing. Now, obviously, if you're following a ketogenic diet, this isn't really going to apply to you. I can touch on that a little bit, but for the most part, this is for those of you that are following an intermittent fasting lifestyle, or you're just trying to figure out when the best time to put your carbs in your diet is in the first place. There is so much nonsense out there in the internet and so many myths that have given us all a carb phobia. And the reality is, even as someone that promotes and condones a ketogenic lifestyle, I am by no means anti-carbohydrate. They are a powerful macronutrient, and no matter what, our bodies always use glucose for something at every single point in time within our life. So when it comes down to timing carbohydrates, you have to look at a couple of different things. You have to look at the overall blood sugar effect and what's going to happen in terms of a rise and fall of insulin and blood sugar and how that might impact you. But you also have to look at your sleep-wake cycle. So if you're following a ketogenic lifestyle, this obviously isn't going to apply quite as much. But when you're following any kind of intermittent fasting lifestyle or any health-conscious lifestyle to begin with, it helps to know when the best point in the day is to introduce your carbohydrates. So I'm going to walk you through a typical day when I am not following a ketogenic diet. And yep, well, keto police, arrest me now, because yes, I don't follow a ketogenic diet all the time. I keto cycle. I go through phases in and phases out, depending on what my specific needs are, because the ketogenic lifestyle is a tool for me. It is not the end-all be-all. And that's why I try to keep a well-rounded approach in general. Okay, so let's consider this a non-fasting day. It's a day where you're just eating your typical day's worth of calories and you're not allocating them into any specific feeding window. So what you're gonna do is when you wake up in the morning, you're not gonna wanna be consuming a lot of carbohydrates. In fact, I would recommend keeping your carbohydrates as close to zero as possible in the morning. And this is simply because you have different hormonal responses that are occurring in the morning. And you have higher levels of cortisol, higher levels of catecholamines that are doing various things in the body that are actually helping you burn fat. So if you consume glucose, you're going to shut that fat burning process off a lot faster. Again, whether you're ketogenic or not. So you want to typically keep the carbs out of the equation with breakfast. Eat a moderate fat, moderate protein diet in the morning. If you're not on a ketogenic diet, you don't want to go overboard on the fats. You want to have just enough to keep you satiated and to make it so that you can get through the day without feeling hungry. Then as we proceed through the rest of the day, you're going to want to introduce carbohydrates slowly with lunch, but in the absence of fat or with lower amounts of fat. Now, this is for two reasons. One, we want to make sure that we're not introducing carbs first thing along with fat. An insulin spike from the carbohydrates in conjunction with fat is going to equal somewhat of a disaster. It's going to cause the fat to go into storage a lot faster than if you were to just consume carbs alone or just consume fat alone. And the very first time that you have carbohydrates after an absence of carbohydrates, the insulin spike is going to be higher because insulin sensitivity increases. That means your receptiveness to carbohydrates is heightened. So as soon as you do consume carbohydrates, your response is going to be more grandiose if it's been a while since you've had carbs. So lunchtime is your perfect time to combine protein with carbs to make sure that you get a little bit of a slower effect on the blood glucose, but you also introduce enough carbs so that you don't have a big insulin spike in the evening time. So I would say something in the ballpark of 20-30 grams of lower glycemic carbohydrates, enough to spike your insulin a little bit, but not to send it through the roof, so you don't end up with a blood sugar crash throughout the rest of the day. I will tell you, ketogenic or not, one of the reasons you feel so good when you don't eat a lot of carbs is because of the stable levels of blood sugar, which brings me to my next point. Evening time is the best time to allocate your carbohydrates for a few different reasons. Remember the blood sugar reason I talked about? If you allocate your carbs towards the evening time, you're more likely to deal with the crash from the blood glucose right around bedtime versus in the middle of the day. It makes sense. You're probably going to have a spike in insulin, a spike in blood glucose that's going to make you feel a little bit wonky and a little bit heavy, regardless of who you are. Okay, we're just that way, especially if you're working out and you're somewhat insulin sensitive. So you might as well time that accordingly. Take the good with the bad with the carbohydrates. If you know you're consuming carbohydrates, go ahead and put them into your diet in the evening time and let them do their thing and let them crash you. But let them crash you when it's appropriate to crash you. Now that also leads into another thing. We have to remember that carbohydrates increase insulin, and that allows tryptophan, an amino acid in protein, to get into the brain. Okay, if that tryptophan can get into the brain because it can actually be absorbed with the insulin, then it can trigger our melatonin to release. Tryptophan converts into melatonin. Okay, melatonin and serotonin work together to help you feel relaxed and help you fall asleep. Double whammy, blood sugar fall plus melatonin increasing allows you to get a nice restful sleep. Now we can insert all the propaganda and all the stuff talking about how amazing sleep is and yada, yada, yada. We know sleep is good, all right? Now the other thing that we have to factor in is it's okay to have a larger amount of your carbohydrates in the evening. It totally is. There's so many myths out there that say that if you have carbohydrates at night, it's all going to go to storage, okay? This is only going to occur if you have way too much in the way of carbohydrates. And that's going to occur in the evening, in the afternoon, in the morning. It doesn't matter. If you have too many carbs, you go through what is called de novo lipogenesis, where the liver turns the excess carbs into fat. It has nothing to do with if you're sedentary immediately or not. The excess carbohydrates are more than likely going to get stored as glycogen, which means you're going to have them for energy the next day. You don't have to burn them immediately. I promise you that. Okay, your body has mechanisms in place to make sure it takes those carbohydrates and it does the right thing with them. What we're trying to do is we're trying to manipulate some of the hormones so that we can get the most out of it. Now, remember how I talked about having the carbohydrates with lunch? The small amount of carbohydrates that we have at lunch makes it so that the negative impact of the carbohydrates with dinner is a little bit diminished. If you were to go completely low carb throughout the course of the day and then have an abundance, like 90 or 100% of your carbs at night, your insulin sensitivity would be so high that you would be much more apt to store those carbohydrates in a negative way. Plus, I can't realistically ask you to eat 100% of your carbohydrates with no fat with dinner. That wouldn't really be fun. That would mean that you're consuming like a chicken breast with a ton of rice. I want you to be able to have a little bit more of a balanced approach when it comes down to dinner time. So all in all, you just have to look at it from the essence of keeping a stable blood sugar. You don't want to be having these blood sugar spikes throughout the course of the day, and you want to be able to control it all in all. So if you're keeping your carbs in the evening time, I promise you that you're not going to gain extra fat. You're going to make it so that you have more energy for the morning workout, and so you actually have something to tap into. And if you are following a ketogenic diet, then honestly, any carbs that you do have should also be allocated towards the evening time as well. It can help you get into that deeper state of sleep, which in general can help your liver out to produce more of those ketones in the first place. If you have ideas for future videos or you want to know more about specific macros and macro timing, just let me know down in the comment section below. As this video is a direct response to what you asked, I want to make sure that I'm keeping true to that. So put them down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.